Hello everyone, my name is Beverly, and I'm the Museum Assistant at the Sutliff Museum, located in Warren, Ohio. This video is part of our Digital Victorian Medicine series, A Million Ways to Die in the 19th Century, where we're focusing on some of the stranger and more domestic causes of death in the Victorian era. In this video, we'll be focusing on respiratory diphtheria, a notorious disease known for killing children throughout history, especially during the Victorian era. This type of diphtheria is spread through respiratory droplets, often by an infected person coughing or sneezing, and people can be asymptomatic carriers, meaning they can spread the disease without even knowing they have it. Diphtheria has a number of symptoms, including weakness, sore throat, mild fever, and swollen glands in the neck. The distinguishing feature in sufferers of diphtheria is a thick, gray blockage made up of tissues killed by the toxin produced by the bacteria, building up in the back of the throat. The name diphtheria comes from a Greek word meaning leather or hide, describing this pseudomembrane, as it is called. These symptoms led to a variety of complications in people who suffered from diphtheria. The pseudomembrane can cover tissues and important structures in the nose and throat, as well as the tonsils and voice box, blocking the airway and making both breathing and swallowing difficult, potentially leading to suffocation. The problems, however, don't end there. While respiratory diphtheria is known for this strangling sort of death, the toxin can do damage elsewhere in the body if it gets into the bloodstream. It can damage the heart and nerves and can even lead to kidney failure and paralysis. What we recognize today as diphtheria went by several names throughout history, including croup, a name we use for a different disease today, and throat distemper, one name that stuck after a 1735 epidemic in New England. There was likely an outbreak in 1659, but we do not know for certain as diphtheria was hard to distinguish from scarlet fever at the time. The throat distemper outbreak of 1735, however, was definitely diphtheria, and it spread throughout New England. The case fatality ratio was 40%, and 32% of children younger than 10 in one New Hampshire town died during that outbreak. Although there were outbreaks in the past, diphtheria was especially deadly during the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution led to people living and working in close quarters with more people than they had previously, meaning many diseases were able to spread from person to person more quickly and more frequently. This disease in particular mostly affected children. Untreated diphtheria has a fatality rate of 5 to 10%, and that number can go up to 20% in children under 5 and adults over 40. Much of what we know about diphtheria before the 19th century consists of outbreaks and deaths. Scientists didn't really start making discoveries about diphtheria until the latter part of that century, meaning that when discoveries were made, knowledge spread, and innovations were made quickly. The bacterium that causes diphtheria was discovered by EDWIN KLEBS in 1883, and Friedrich Loeffler was the first person to cultivate it in 1884. Prior to the 1880s, the best option children suffering from diphtheria had was a tracheotomy, a procedure which involved inserting a tube directly into the patient's trachea after making an incision in the throat, all of which was done without anesthesia. Air could then be pushed into the lungs through the tube. This procedure was risky due to the low rate of success and high potential for infection. The tracheotomy was replaced in 1885 when Joseph O. Dwyer, a doctor from Cleveland, developed tools and a technique for intubation, and that innovation was life-saving. As uncomfortable as intubation is, the process helped diphtheria sufferers breathe by forcing the blockage in the patient's airway out of the way. It was by no means a perfect solution, but it did provide an option where few had previously been available. It afforded the affected children a greater chance of survival than a tracheotomy did. Later progress in medicine, namely vaccinations against diphtheria, made O'Dwyer's intubation obsolete, but this treatment was vital in the time before vaccinations were available. Although the vaccines were not widely used until the 1920s, the first steps towards a vaccine for diphtheria were being made decades earlier. The first type of vaccine-like treatment was antitoxin and serum therapy in the 1890s. Serum, as a medical term, refers to the remaining part of blood plasma after the clotting agents are separated out and removed. Antitoxin is a substance created by the body in response to the presence of toxin to prevent harmful effects of further exposure. Through research, scientists discovered that not only could this therapy prevent the negative effects in animals who hadn't contracted diphtheria, but it could also treat animals who had. These initial experiments were conducted on guinea pigs, but the later approach used larger animals, such as sheep and horses, to create large enough amounts of antitoxin to immunize and treat people. One scientist who worked on creating serum therapy, Emil von Behring, won the first Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1901 for his work with diphtheria. We still use antitoxin, in combination with antibiotics, to treat diphtheria today, although cases are increasingly rare since the widespread availability of modern diphtheria vaccines. Work continued towards a more modern sort of vaccination after the creation and implementation of serum therapy. The main problem scientists were contending with was finding the right balance between toxin and antitoxin to create an effective and safe vaccine. The initial combination, putting medicine on the right track, was created in 1907, and William H. Park found the right balance in 1914, creating the vaccine that was used until further medical progress led to its replacement in the 1930s. These adjustments and changes continued through the decades, leading to the modern presence of diphtheria vaccines. Instead of using the actual toxin, modern vaccines use a neutralized form of the toxin, called a toxoid, which still provides lifelong immunity from the disease. Today, diphtheria does not have one single vaccine. Rather, it is part of 4 different kinds of vaccines, combined with a vaccine for at least one other disease. Usually, diphtheria is combined with tetanus and sometimes acellular pertussis or whooping cough. The 4 vaccines today are DT, DTaP, TD, and Tdap. The DT, or diphtheria and tetanus, and DTaP, diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis vaccines are intended for children under the age of 7, while the TD and Tdap vaccines are intended for older children and adults. Balto is a name that has been ingrained into popular culture, in part due to the animated film. But this sled dog really was considered a hero in his day. He was the head of one of several teams making the historic 1925 run to deliver diphtheria antitoxin to treat sick children in Nome, Alaska. His team ran the final leg of the journey, delivering the antitoxin to the hospital. The dogs were heroes for a short time before ending up on display in Los Angeles. Their fate, however, changed when George Kimball, a Cleveland businessman, was horrified by the neglected state the dogs were in and worked with the plain dealer to buy the dogs and bring them back to Cleveland. They were successful, and the dogs lived the rest of their lives at the Brookside Zoo, now Cleveland Metro Park Zoo. After Balto died at the age of 14, he was taxidermied and is now on display at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. Along with the statue of him in New York City's Central Park, the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo also has statues of Balto and Togo, another lead dog, near the exit of the wolf exhibit. Diphtheria touched the Sutliff family, as it did many families during the Victorian era. Mary Ruth Sutliff died from diphtheria on December 26, 1864, at just 11 years old. She died even before the discovery of the bacterium that causes the disease and well before the creation of any sort of vaccine. Thanks to the advances in medical science, diphtheria is significantly less common now due to vaccines that can prevent it. Cases still exist, including the death of an unvaccinated boy in Spain in 2015, but diphtheria in the United States has been virtually eliminated in about 75 years. Thank you for joining me for this portion of A Million Ways to Die in the 19th Century. If you have any questions, please email or call the Sutliff Museum. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos, and follow us on social media for more facts about the abolitionist movement, the Victorian era, and of course, the Sutliff family.